On the morning of November 29, 2025, in Pesisir Selatan, West Sumatra, the rain felt like it had weight. Not drops, impact, like thousands of fists striking the rooftops of the valley. By dawn, the sky was already the color of wet earth, and every radio in the region repeated the same warning on a loop. Record rainfall, rising water, landslides expected. At 74, Rafti had survived dozens of monsoons. He knew the sounds of the land, the moods of the hills, the warnings of the rivers. Or at least, he thought he did. That morning he wasn't outside tending his garden or repairing the bamboo fence like always. He was holding his 6-year-old granddaughter, Alia, still half asleep, her breath warm on his collarbone. Her mother had left early to search for medicine and food in a nearby town before the roads closed. Rafti had promised to keep Alia inside, safe, far from the mud. But when the rumble began, low, deep, almost like the earth clearing its throat, Rafti knew instantly this time was different. The chickens in the neighbor's yard fell silent. A motorcycle engine died mid-road. The dogs sprinted uphill without looking back. Then he heard it, a cracking roar, like a massive beam of wood breaking under its own weight. The mountain above the village was moving. Rafti stepped outside with Alia in his arms and saw the impossible, trees sliding sideways, the ridge sagging. The first wave of mud smashing through the lower houses. Water surged from both sides of the road, turning the village's busiest path into a violent brown river. He tried calling his daughter, but the signal collapsed. He shouted for the neighbors, but the rain swallowed every word. And with Alia gripping his shirt, whispering, "Ato, I'm scared," Rafti understood something he had never admitted before. This time, he wasn't sure he could outrun the mountain. They had seconds, maybe less, before the hillside gave way completely. They say every storm leaves an echo behind. Tell me from which city you're watching and what time it is there right now. I want to know how far this story travels. The moment the first tremor passed through the ground, Rafti felt it in his knees before he heard it in his ears. Alia tightened her arms around his neck. The little girl rarely cried, but this time he could feel her chest press against his ribs in short, panicked breaths. The air tasted like wet soil, metallic and cold, as if the earth itself had been cut open. A thin stream of muddy water pushed past their doorway, then thickened, rising quickly until it was brushing against Rafti's shins. He didn't have time to gather clothes or food. He didn't even have time to grab the old flashlight he kept in the kitchen drawer for blackouts. The only thing he had the chance to hold was Alia, and that was enough. He stepped into the open, letting the water hit him full force. It was colder than he expected. The rain, the overflowing ditches, and the broken drainage channels had combined into a single violent current sweeping across the street. Farther downhill, he could see the roof of the Rahman family's house tilt, then slide several meters, before crashing into a cluster of banana trees. The sound was unlike anything he had heard in his 74 years, half thunder, half the roar of something alive and hungry. A neighbor, old Harun, shouted from his porch, waving one arm and pointing toward the main hill. "Rafti, the ridge is splitting." Rafti squinted through the sheets of rain. At first he saw nothing but the usual darkness of a storm. Then a flash of lightning exposed the entire ridgeline. For one impossible second, the world froze in a white snapshot, a long black fracture running across the mountain, wider than a road, trees leaning at unnatural angles, a wall of mud beginning to slide. Then the light faded, replaced again by the heavy gray of the monsoon sky. Harun yelled something else, but the rain swallowed the words. He disappeared behind his collapsing front fence. Alia whispered, "Ato, is Mama coming back?" Rafti forced calm into his voice, even though fear pressed hard against the inside of his throat. "She will find us later. But first, we must get to higher ground." He adjusted Alia's weight on his hip. His joints screamed, but he didn't slow. Moving through the water felt like walking inside a river that kept changing directions. Every step slid sideways, every shift of weight threatened to take him down. He looked uphill. The narrow path behind the village, the one that led to the old rubber plantation, was still visible between houses. If they reached that slope, they might have a chance. Another tremor rolled beneath them. Rafty's heart jolted as he heard the deep rumble of the landslide building behind the lower homes. Roofs, fences, entire walls were being torn from their foundations. The mud was coming faster. He pushed forward. A motorcycle carried by the current slammed into a post just a few meters away. The loud metallic crack made Alia flinch and bury her face in Rafty's shoulder. The bike spun, dipped, and vanished beneath the swirling brown water. The current rose to his knees, then to his thighs, then to his waist. Alia's small fingers dug into his collar. "Arto, I'm scared. I'm scared." "I know, Anak," he whispered. "But hold tight to me." He used his free hand to grab onto the side of a fence, dragging himself one step at a time toward the path. The mud sucked at his legs, pulling with surprising strength. Twice he almost slipped, and twice he recovered only by swinging his body sideways, twisting his back, and shielding Alia from the fall. He couldn't maintain that forever. His strength was finite. The mountain was not. As he reached the corner of the lane, he heard cries from inside a house partially submerged in brown water. "Help, please, someone!" Rafty froze. He recognized the voice. It was Ina, a young mother who lived alone with her son. The water was already halfway up her windows. Rafty instinctively stepped toward the house, but the ground beneath him shifted violently. The mudslide had hit the far edge of the village and was tearing downhill in branches, splitting into smaller torrents that cut through the streets like knives. He looked at the house, he looked at Alia, he looked at the rising wall of mud. He knew he couldn't save both. Alia touched his cheek. Her voice was tiny, trembling. "Arto, don't leave me." He held her tighter. "Never." He forced himself away from Ina's collapsing home, guilt slicing through his chest. He hated himself for moving on. But if he stayed, Alia would die. He couldn't let that happen. Not today. Not while she still had the warmth of life in her small hands. Another house cracked open behind him, its walls breaking under the weight of mud. A refrigerator, a mattress, and several bags of rice tumbled out, swallowed by the current. Rafty finally reached the base of the uphill path. The water here wasn't as deep, but the mud was thicker, like wet cement that grabbed at his feet. He took his first step onto the slope, and the entire mountain groaned. It sounded like a long, terrible sigh. Trees bent, stones lifted. Somewhere above them, an entire section of earth tore loose. Alia screamed and hid her face. Rafty didn't look back. Looking back would only slow him, and there was no space for hesitation. He bent forward, shifted Alia to his left side, and began climbing. His legs burned. His breaths came as ragged gasps. Each step felt like lifting a mountain with his own weight. Rain hammered the back of his neck, dripping down his spine like ice. Halfway up the path, the mudslide reached the foot of the hill and hit the houses below with a thunderous crash. Rafty felt the vibration in the soles of his feet. He could feel the land moving, trembling, breathing in its violent way. "Just a little more," he whispered, unsure if he was speaking to Alia or to himself. The path narrowed near a fallen tree. Rafty tried to go around, but the slope was too slick. He pressed Alia to his chest and climbed over the trunk, gripping the wet bark with his fingertips. His foot slipped, and for a terrifying second his body tilted backward. He leaned forward with everything he had left. His shoulder screamed, his back spasmed. Alia cried out, but he didn't fall. He dragged himself and the child over the trunk, landing hard on the other side. Pain shot up his spine, but he didn't let go of her, not even for a breath. Above them, the old plantation was within reach. Just a few more meters. The mudslide smashed through another row of houses below, sending a wave of debris up the slope. Rafty lifted Alia higher in his arms. "Hold on, Anak," he whispered. "Hold on. We're almost there." Behind him, the mountain roared again. In front of him, the only hope left was higher ground. The higher ground did not feel safe, only less dangerous. As soon as Rafty and Alia reached the edge of the old rubber plantation, the roar of the landslide echoed below them like a distant engine that refused to shut off. The earth trembled in short, irregular pulses, and the air vibrated with the sound of trees snapping somewhere out of sight. Alia kept her face buried in his shoulder. Her breaths were shallow, uneven. Every few seconds her small hands tightened around his shirt, as if she feared that letting go might pull her down the hill with the mud. Rafti leaned against a rubber tree, letting his legs rest without fully stopping. If he sat down now, he wasn't sure he'd find the strength to stand again while holding her. His arms trembled from the climb, but he adjusted her gently and forced his breathing to settle. "We're above the village now," he whispered. "We're safe for the moment." Alia didn't lift her head. "Where is Mama?" Rafti closed his eyes. Rain trickled down his eyelids like sweat. "She went on the road early. She's clever. She'll find high ground like we did." A distant explosion cracked through the fog, something large hitting something larger. A house? A water tank? A piece of hillside? He didn't know. When Alia finally looked up, her eyes were wide and shining. "Atto, can we see our home?" He turned toward the slope. The rain had weakened enough for him to see the valley below, but not enough to bring clarity. What remained of the village was a distorted shape of roofs at odd angles, broken walls, piles of debris, and a brown river carving new paths with every surge. The small yellow house he loved, with its blue door and Alia's painted stones lined along the step, was nowhere in sight. "It's hidden under the mud," he said, "but we will wait for the storm to calm. Then we'll see more." A low rumble crawled up the slope, and part of a distant hillside gave way again. A new wave of mud spilled into an area farther down, flattening trees like grass in the wind. Alia flinched. "We stay up here," he said quickly. "This ground is stronger." A movement in the corner of his vision made him turn. A group of people climbed toward them from another path, 3 adults and a boy. For a moment Rafti feared they were strangers, but then one of the women lifted her arm. "Rafti!" He recognized her immediately. "Lena!" She reached him with mud streaked across her face, her breath sharp and fast. Fariz, her teenage grandson, had a cut above his eyebrow. The couple behind her clung to each other, shivering. "You're alive," Lena said, touching his arm as if she needed to confirm it. "You too," he answered. "Your house?" "Gone," she said. "It slid almost whole. We barely got out the back. The water was waist-high before we reached the path." Fariz looked at Alia with concern. "She all right?" "Scared," Rafti said. "Cold, but holding on." Lena's eyes searched the valley. "Your daughter?" "On the road," Rafti replied softly. "She left early to get supplies. I tried calling, but the signal died." Lena exhaled slowly. The road to the town flooded first. If she saw the water rising, she'd climb. "She's smart." Rafti nodded, but the reassurance landed softly. Every minute that passed without seeing the red raincoat tightened something inside him. The boy, Fariz, wiped rain from his face. "Do you think rescue people will come? The ones with boats, or the army?" "They will," Rafti said. "But the storm has taken the roads. They'll need time." He tried to sound calm for their sake. Inside, he felt far from it. A trembling sensation rippled through the ground again. Alia wrapped her arms around his neck. "Atta, I'm cold." He scanned the forest. The rubber trees were thick here, but there was no shelter. No roofs, only wet bark and tangled roots. Farther uphill, however, the forest darkened into a deeper green. He remembered something. "There used to be tapping huts," he said. "Long ago. Shelters for the workers." Lena frowned. "Are you sure any are still standing?" "No," he admitted. "But if one is, it would have a roof." Fariz straightened. "I'll go first. If I slip, you'll see where it's dangerous." The courage in his voice reminded Rafti of himself at that age, before his knees ached, before loss taught him caution. "All right," he said, "but stay close." The group formed a line, Fariz in front, Rafti behind him with Alia, Lena close behind, the couple trailing last. The mud was thinner here, but the slope was steeper, and the rain had turned fallen leaves into slick mats. Twice the boy stumbled. Twice he caught himself by gripping trunks or roots. Rafti climbed with slow, deliberate movement. His legs felt like heavy logs. His back pulsed with dull fire. Every step took conscious effort. But Alia kept her arms wrapped around him, her cheek against his shoulder. "Talk to me," he whispered to her. "Tell me something." She blinked tiredly. "What do I say?" "Anything." She hesitated. "When the sun comes back, I want to count chickens again and sit by the blue door, and I want Mama there." He swallowed hard. "That's what we're walking toward." Ahead, Fariz called softly, "I see something." They joined him at the edge of a small clearing. A structure leaned between two trees, an old worker's hut. The roof was rusted tin. Half the left wall had collapsed inward, but it was still standing. Rafti felt something he hadn't felt since dawn: relief. "It will hold long enough," he said. "Let's go inside." The hut smelled of old wood and damp earth. A rotted bench lay in the corner, but there was enough space for all of them to sit close. Rain hammered the tin roof, but it no longer touched their skin. Alia curled into Rafti's chest. Her shaking finally began to slow. Lena wrung water from her scarf. "We'll wait here until the rain weakens. Then we decide." Rafti nodded. He listened to the patterns of the storm. The distant landslide had quieted, but not stopped. The wind still carried the muffled crashes of collapsing debris. Down in the valley, the river of mud continued carving its destructive path. Alia looked up at him. "Atto, Mama will find us, right?" He kissed the top of her wet hair. "She will search, and we'll stay where she can reach us." But inside, a new fear whispered. What if she was caught on the road? What if the mud came from both sides? What if she is calling out for them now, unheard beneath the storm? He shut his eyes. Not yet. Not now. They had survived the first wave. They were alive. Above them, the storm continued its steady assault, relentless but no longer furious. Below them, the world they knew shifted into something unrecognizable, and somewhere in that shifting world, a daughter fought her own battle to return. Rafti held Alia closer, feeling the fragile warmth of her small body, and whispered to himself, "One storm at a time." The roof of the old tapping hut rattled under the stubborn rain, each drop sounding heavier than the last. After the frantic climb, the sudden stillness inside felt unreal, like stepping into a memory instead of a building. Rafti sat with his back against the least rotten wall. Alia curled against his chest, her breathing finally less frantic. For the first time since dawn, he allowed himself to breathe fully. Not deeply, not comfortably, just fully. Lena sat across from him, knees hugged to her chest, eyes fixed on a gap in the wall that gave a partial view of the forest. The couple beside her whispered softly, their hands intertwined. Fariz paced in the small space, restless energy shaking off the terror he didn't want to show. Outside, the storm softened into a steady hiss. The worst seemed to have passed, but the danger had not. A sudden cracking noise echoed from the valley below, like a giant snapping a bundle of sticks. Everyone froze. Alia gripped Rafti's shirt again. "Another building," Fariz whispered. Rafti nodded once. "Or a tree. The soil is still shifting. We can't assume the ground is done moving." Alia lifted her head just enough to look at him. "Atto, the house is gone, isn't it?" He paused. She had spoken the truth he had been avoiding. Children sensed the shape of reality long before adults admitted it. "We will know for sure later," he said gently, "but whatever happens, we're together. That's what matters now." Her lower lip trembled, and she pressed herself back into his chest. Minutes stretched. The storm hummed. The hut creaked. The forest held its breath. Then Lena spoke. "Rafti, when the land breaks like this, the old paths disappear. The river changes direction. Even if the road didn't collapse, it might be buried." Rafti understood the weight of her words. If the river had changed course, it might have swallowed the road entirely, where his daughter had been walking. A cold pulse went through him, but fear was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Alia shivering in his arms. "We'll look for sign of her when the rain eases," he said. "For now, everyone needs strength." As if summoned by his words, his stomach tightened with hunger. They had eaten nothing since dawn. Alia, who had not complained once, would soon feel it even more strongly. Fariz stopped pacing. Maybe we can find something outside. Fruit, sago, anything. Rafti raised a hand. Not yet. The soil is too unstable. You step wrong, the hillside could take you. The boy nodded but didn't look convinced. Youth had its fire, but fire could be dangerous in a storm. Another rumble rolled across the valley, softer this time. The storm's hunger was fading, but the land was still digesting what it had taken. Alia's voice broke through the quiet. Atto, if Mama looks for us, will she know to come here? Rafti felt the question burrow inside him like a thorn. Would she? If she had climbed another hill, if she had been pushed back by the water, if she had slipped, if she had... No, not now. He cupped Alia's cheek, guiding her gaze back to him. Your mother knows me, he said. She knows where I would run, and she knows I would never leave you behind. She will follow our footprints, our trail, our instinct. And what if she can't see the trail? Alia asked. Then she'll shout, he said softly, and we will hear her. We just have to stay where the ground is safe. The hut shook again, just a brief tremor, but enough to make the couple flinch. The woman pressed a hand over her mouth. I can't stay here, she whispered. I can't sit still anymore. I need to do something. Lena reached over and touched her arm. Staying alive is doing something. But the woman shook her head. My mother. She was in the lower houses. I have to go look. Rafti felt that familiar internal split, the one he'd felt when he heard Ina screaming from her collapsing home, the impossible choices survivors face. He spoke carefully. If you go down now, you might not come back. The mud hasn't finished moving. But if we wait... If you wait, he interrupted gently, you'll still be alive when help arrives. Her husband swallowed hard, torn between duty to his mother-in-law and the reality in front of him. Finally, he lowered his head. We stay, he whispered. The hut fell quiet again. Then, finally, the rain began to lighten. Not stop, but thin enough to see the valley without a curtain of water blocking the view. Light filtered through the trees in pale, trembling beams. Fariz went to the doorway. I think it's slowing, he called. Rafti carefully stood, holding Alia close. His legs protested, stiff from fear and exhaustion. He stepped outside under the overhang of the roof and looked toward the valley. What he saw made his breath catch. The river had indeed changed course. The main road was gone, swallowed entirely, replaced by a swirling brown channel filled with pieces of homes, furniture, clothing, and tree trunks. The lower village was a patchwork of roofs half buried, walls leaning, mud ridges where streets had been. He scanned desperately for movement. A rescuer, a neighbor, a body, a familiar figure in a red raincoat. Nothing. Alia tugged on his sleeve. Atto, is she there? I don't see her yet, he whispered. But that doesn't mean anything. She could be on another path. She could be above the village, on another hillside. He remembered a ridge to the east, one his daughter used to climb as a teenager when she wanted solitude. If she had been caught between the rising water and the falling mud, she might have gone there. We'll look, he said. Not now, but soon. Behind him, Lena stepped out of the hut, her eyes wide. I've never seen destruction like this, she murmured. Not even in the floods of '98. Nature doesn't repeat, Rafti said quietly. It escalates. Alia whispered, Atto, I'm hungry. That simple sentence pierced him deeper than fear or pain. I know, Anak, he said softly. We'll fix that. He turned to the group. There should be fruit trees farther uphill, wild rambutan, maybe some young sago palms. We move slowly, no rushing. We stay close. Fariz nodded determinedly. Lena steadied herself, but before they took the first step, a faint sound drifted through the trees. A voice, high, distant, carried by the thinning rain. Rafti froze. The others turned. Alia's head snapped up. Mama? Rafti held her tightly and listened. The voice came again, broken by the wind, but unmistakably human. Someone calling out, calling for help. And the direction was wrong, not from the valley, not from the ridge, but from the direction of the old riverbed, the most unstable ground left. Lena whispered, "That sounds like—" "Someone trapped," Fariz finished. Rafti felt his heart hammer, not from fear, but from the sudden, violent surge of purpose. He shifted Alia in his arms. "Arto?" she asked. He looked toward the trees where the voice had come from. If someone was alive down there, they didn't have long. "We're going," he said quietly. "But Raf," Lena began. "We're going," he repeated. "All of us. We move carefully, we do not run, but we go, now." Alia wrapped her arms around his neck. "Is it Mama?" Rafti didn't know, but he whispered, "We're going to find out." And with the storm finally thinning and the ruined valley waiting below, the small group of survivors stepped out of the shelter and into the forest, toward the voice calling through the shattered landscape, toward danger, toward hope, toward whatever waited next. The voice came again, faint, broken, carried through the mist like a thread of sound pulled by the wind. Rafti steadied himself, turned toward the old riverbed, and listened. The rain had thinned just enough for the forest to breathe. Each leaf dripped steadily, each branch trembled with the aftershocks of the storm. But beneath all that, there it was. "Help!" A quiet, muffled cry. Alia pressed her face into his shoulder. Fariz stepped forward first, squinting at the slopes ahead. "It's coming from the low side," he said. "Near the old river path. That ground is unstable," Lena warned. "It hasn't been used in years." "Unstable or not," Rafti said, "someone is alive." He adjusted Alia in his arms, bracing his back. The weight of her small body felt heavier with each hour, but he refused to let go. "We move slowly, no rushing, no sudden steps." The group nodded. They left the shelter of the tapping hut and stepped into the wet forest. The hillside sloped downward in a gradual curve. The earth soft beneath their sandals. Old rubber trees stood like silent watchers, their trunks dark and damp. Fallen branches littered the ground, some snapped clean by the landslide's tremors, others tilted as if still deciding whether to fall. The air smelled of torn earth and rotting leaves. Fariz led, one hand steadying himself on trunks and thick vines. Rafti followed, then Lena, then the couple. The rain no longer masked each sound. They could hear the mud shifting, water trickling, branches creaking. The world felt wounded but awake. As they descended, the cry came again, clearer this time. "Help! Please, someone!" A woman's voice. Alia's head lifted. "Mama?" Rafti swallowed hard. The voice was wrong for his daughter. Older, strained, not the tone he knew. But he couldn't tell her that. Not yet. "We will find who it is," he whispered, "and we'll look for your mother next." The slope steepened. Fariz paused beside a fallen trunk. "Careful here," he said. "The soil's sliding." Rafti set Alia down for the first time in hours so he could climb more safely. She held his hand tightly, stepping where he stepped. Mud squished beneath their feet. In some places it clung like glue, in others it slid like soap. When they reached the next ridge, they finally saw the source of the voice. At the bottom of a shallow gully, a section of old riverbank had collapsed, forming a hollow bowl of earth. Inside it, half submerged in mud up to her waist, was a woman in a torn raincoat. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her arms trembled from holding herself upright. She looked up desperately as they approached. "Please, I can't move." Rafti's breath hitched. He recognized her. "Ina," Lena whispered. "Oh, God." It was indeed Ina, the young mother who had shouted from her collapsing home earlier. Rafti had made the crushing decision to walk away from her scream to save Alia. And yet here she was, alive, trapped, but alive. Guilt pressed on him like a hand to the chest. "Ina," Rafti called, "we're here." Her eyes filled with tears of relief. "I thought I was going to die. I've been calling. No one answered." "We hear you now," he said, "but the mud around you is unstable. We have to approach carefully." The old riverbed had acted like a trap. The walls around her sloped inward, slick and dangerous. One wrong step, and any of them could slip into the same pocket of mud. Rafti scanned the gully. A fallen bamboo cluster lay across one side, its long stalks forming a natural ladder if they could pry it loose. "Fariz," he said, "help me with that bamboo." The boy nodded and moved beside him. Together they tested the stalks. Some were cracked, but several were strong enough to hold weight if handled carefully. They tore away the broken pieces and kept 3 long poles. "We'll create a support path," Rafti said. "Lena, stay with Alia." Alia grabbed his sleeve. "Arto, be careful." He kissed her forehead. "Always." He and Fariz eased down the slope, sliding the bamboo poles in front of them to distribute their weight. The mud rippled with each step, but they stayed above the surface. The closer they got to Ina, the more unstable the ground felt. She sobbed softly. "I can't feel my legs. They're numb." "That's from the cold," Rafti said gently. "We'll pull you out." He wedged one bamboo pole under her right arm, another under her left. "Hold on." Fariz braced the third pole behind them to keep from sliding. "On my count," Rafti said. 1, 2, pull." Ina cried out as the suction released around her. Mud clung to her like hands refusing to let go. Rafti shifted his weight backward, using his aging legs like anchors, his arms trembling from effort. Fariz leaned back too. "She's moving." "Again," Rafti said. 1, 2, pull." With a wet, awful sound, Ina lurched upward. Mud drained off her like thick paint. Rafti slipped for half a second, his knee buckling, but Fariz caught him with the bamboo pole. They pulled Ina up the slope inch by inch until Lena and the couple reached them and helped drag her onto solid ground. Ina collapsed into sobs. "My son, where is my son?" Lena knelt beside her. "He wasn't with you." "He ran outside when the wall fell," Ina cried. "The water took him. I tried to follow." She covered her face with her mud-caked hands. The forest seemed to tighten around them. The loss, the fear, the exhaustion, it all pressed in like a shadow. They formed a small protective circle around her, though none knew what to say. Rafti put a hand on Ina's shoulder. "We will look for him. Not now, not in this mud. But when the land settles, we'll search." Ina nodded weakly, tears mixing with rain. Alia tugged on Rafti's sleeve. "Arto." "What about Mama?" Her small voice was the sound that cut through everything. He looked toward the valley again. The rain had weakened to a mist. Through gaps in the trees, the destruction was clearer now. Twisted metal, collapsed walls, debris piled like broken memories. No red raincoat. But the eastern ridge, the high path his daughter knew well, was partly visible now through the thinning clouds. A narrow strip of earth wound upward, a path barely spared by the slide. "If she escaped the road," he whispered, "that's where she'd go." He turned to the group. "We've saved one life," he said softly. "Now we look for the next." Lena squeezed Ina's hand. "Can you walk?" "Slowly," she whispered. "Then we go slowly," Rafti said. "But we move. The ridge is safer than the valley." He lifted Alia again, feeling the dull burn in his arms. His legs felt carved from wet stone, but he didn't falter. The group rose. Behind them, the pocket of mud where Ina had been trapped collapsed entirely, filling in like a wound closing. Ahead of them, the ridge path waited, narrow, steep, but intact. Rafti took the first step toward it. One step closer to the ridge, one step closer to whatever waited there, one step closer to his daughter, one storm at a time. The path to the eastern ridge clung to the hillside like a scar. In places, the storm had bitten chunks out of it, leaving exposed roots and slabs of rock hanging over a steep drop. Below, the valley looked like a broken model of itself, patches of brown where streets had been, a new river carved through the center like a fresh wound. Rafti felt the height in every step. He held Alia tight against his chest, her arms looped around his neck. Behind him, Lena guided Ina, one arm around the younger woman's waist. Fariz walked ahead, tapping the ground with a stick before each step. No one wasted breath on small talk. Their focus belonged to balance. The rain had thinned to a mist, but the clouds still pressed low. The air smelled of wet bark and raw earth. Somewhere far off, Another piece of hillside collapsed with a dull roar. But here the world had shrunk to mud, stone, and the next safe foothold. "Are we close, Atto?" Alia whispered. "Almost," he said. "There's a lookout up ahead. Your mother used to go there when she needed to think." "She took me once," Alia murmured. "We picked red flowers." He clung to that image, a younger Rena laughing on this same path, bare feet sure on the dirt. If she had escaped the flood, this was where she would run. They squeezed past a section where the outer edge of the trail had cracked and sagged. The drop beyond made Lena suck in a breath. Aina kept her eyes on Rafti's feet and copied each move. At last, the path widened into a narrow plateau, a shelf of rock and soil dotted with trees. Years ago, villagers had watched harvests from here. Today, it was something else. A cluster of people huddled beneath the largest tree. Some sat with their backs to the trunk, others leaned on makeshift walking sticks. Faces turned as the new group emerged. "Lena!" someone called. "You made it!" "And old man Rafti," another voice added. Rafti barely heard them. His gaze swept the ridge in quick, anxious strokes, searching for one color. Red. Jackets, shirts, scarves. Mud brown, storm gray, leaf green. No red. His heartbeat stuttered. Then Alia tugged on his shirt. "Atto, look!" Near the far edge of the plateau, a torn red raincoat hung over a rock. Beneath it, a woman sat leaning against the stone. One leg stretched stiffly in front of her. Her head drooped, mud streaked her face. For a moment she looked terribly still. Rafti's legs moved before his thoughts caught up. He crossed the uneven ground, every step heavier than the last. The ridge noise faded to a distant hum. He stopped a meter away. "Rena," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. She blinked slowly, as if dragging herself back from somewhere far away. When her eyes focused on him, something inside his chest let go. "Aya!" Her voice was hoarse but clear. Alia wriggled down from his arms. He barely managed to lower her before she broke into a run. "Mama!" She slipped in the mud, caught herself, and crashed into her mother's chest. Rena wrapped both arms around her, pulling her close as if afraid the hill might still try to steal her. "I thought the water took you," Alia sobbed. "I thought the mountain took you," Rena whispered into her hair. "The road went under so fast. I climbed wherever I could. I kept looking at the hills, thinking, Aya will go up. He won't stay in the valley when the river grows angry." Rafti knelt beside them, his joints protesting. Up close he could see how pale she was beneath the mud, how her hands shook even while holding Alia. His eyes dropped to her right leg. It was badly swollen, the ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. The fabric around it was torn and stained darker. "I slipped when the first crack opened in the road," she said quietly. "Some neighbors pulled me to a higher path and brought me here before the big slide hit. They went back to look for others." Her gaze flicked toward the ruined valley. They didn't come back. Silence settled over their small circle. Down below, the new river roared on, indifferent. "You're alive," Rafti said. The words came out rough. "That's what we have. The rest, we face one piece at a time." Rena let out a breath that sounded like it hurt. "I carried her all the way up here," she asked. "At your age," he tried to shrug and failed halfway. "Better to have my back complain than my heart." Her mouth twisted into something like a smile. "There were no clean choices today," she said, stroking Alia's hair. "Only the ones we can live with." Around them, reunions and quiet grief unfolded. Lena fell into a cousin's arms. Ina sat heavily beside another woman and whispered about the son the water had taken. Names passed between people like fragile lanterns. This one made it. This one is missing. This one was last seen near the bridge. Fariz spoke with a man whose arm was splintered with sticks and cloth. "Any sign of rescue?" the boy asked. "We heard engines," the man replied. "Far away. The clouds were too thick to see anything." Rafti adjusted the red coat so it covered both Rena and Alia. The girl clung to her mother, eyes half closed now that panic was fading and exhaustion had space to move in. "Your leg needs to stay still," he said. When help comes, they'll take those who can't climb first. You should be one of them. Rena shook her head. Children, then those who truly can't move, she said. You and Alia stay together. I won't have her lifted away from both of us in one day. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. She was right about at least one thing. If Alia left his arms now, the fear might break him more cleanly than any bone. Before he could answer, a new sound rolled over the ridge. Not earth, not thunder. A steady chopping that vibrated in his ribs. Heads tilted upward. Loose leaves shivered on the ground. Somewhere above the clouds, something heavy moved. A helicopter, someone breathed. The word jumped from mouth to mouth. People who had been sitting pushed themselves to their feet. Those who couldn't stand raised their hands instead. Through a thinning patch of grey, a dark shape appeared. Small at first, then larger as it approached. Rotor blades sliced the air, beating the mist into swirling rings. Voices rose at once. Here! Up here! Wave something! Jackets, scarves, pieces of tarp went into the air. The ridge came alive with movement for the first time since they'd arrived. The helicopter followed the new river at low speed, scanning the wreckage below. For a terrible moment it seemed to pass the ridge without slowing. Then it banked, turning toward them. They see us, Lena said, more to herself than anyone else. Wind pressed against them as it neared. Alia covered her ears. Dust and droplets spun in tiny whirlwinds. A faint amplified voice crackled from a speaker, lost under the rotor noise but full of urgency. They'll mark this spot, the man with the splint shouted. Maybe winch people up. Maybe drop supplies, but they know we're here now. Rafti felt something loosen in his shoulders. Not safety, not yet, but the first real hint that the world outside the valley had noticed they existed. He looked at Rena and Alia, pressed together under the red coat. Mud and fear had painted over everything else, but they were breathing. They were touching. That was enough for this moment. Rena met his eyes. Whatever happens next, she called over the noise. Thank you for climbing. Higher? He shook his head. Thank you for teaching me where to climb. Above them, the helicopter hovered, fighting invisible currents. Below them, the land continued to settle into new, harsh shapes. Between sky and broken earth, on a strip of ridge the storm had spared, an old man stood with his daughter and granddaughter and held on to the one victory the day had granted. The mountain had moved. The river had changed course. The village was gone. But the three of them, for now, were still together. And the storm had not taken everything. When the helicopter finally lowered a rescue officer onto the ridge, evening had already begun turning the sky into a dim watercolor of grey and brown. The storm had quieted, but the silence it left behind wasn't gentle, just the hollow calm that follows something too big to fully understand. One by one, the survivors were lifted from the hillside, some with tears, others with blank eyes, all carrying pieces of a day that would never leave them. Rafti held Alia as if she were the last warm thing in the world. Rena leaned into him, her injured leg splinted, her breath steady but thin. When the harness lifted them into the air, Alia first, then Rena, then finally Rafti. He looked down at what remained of their village, the rows of houses, the streets, the gardens. All gone. Yet the ridge where they had stood together remained intact. A single line of survival drawn across the mountain's anger. Nature had taken much, but not everything, not the three of them, not this time. And as the helicopter carried them toward a future they hadn't expected to see, Rafti understood. Survival was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the next one. If this story reached you today, tell me from which city you're watching and what time it is there right now. I want to know how far these stories travel.